They told me it couldn't be done. The world around me was firm in its judgment, unwavering in its logic. I had no money, no connections, and no visible way to achieve what I deeply longed for. Yet within me stirred a conviction more powerful than facts, a knowing, born not of the senses but of something far older, far deeper. I didn't have what I desired in the outer world, but I carried it faithfully in my inner one, and that made all the difference. What I manifested defied reason, but I didn't manifest it through struggle or effort. I did it by imagining, by assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled, and living from the end as though it were already so. And the proof? I live in it now. I walk in what once seemed impossible. There is no power greater than your own wonderful human imagination. The moment I turned away from appearances and took refuge in the unseen world of feeling, I activated the law that governs everything. The law does not care about probability. It is not interested in what others think is realistic. It responds only to assumption. When you persist in assuming something is true, and when you remain loyal to that assumption, regardless of outer conditions, it must harden into fact. I tested this law not once, but many times. The results were consistent, repeatable, and real. I remember vividly when I desired to travel across the world and had not a single penny to do so. The world said it was impossible. But I dared to feel myself in the destination. I heard voices congratulating me, felt the warmth of the climate, saw the places I wanted to visit in vivid detail. Every night, I laid my head on the pillow as if I were already there. I abandoned the old story of lack, and in a matter of weeks, through circumstances I never could have imagined, the journey unfolded. Funds came, opportunities emerged, and the impossible became fact. That is not coincidence, that is law. Once, a dear friend of mine, trapped in a situation where love seemed utterly lost, came to me with tears. She wanted reconciliation, but everything pointed to the finality of separation. I instructed her not to beg, not to plead, not even to contact the person, but to see herself as already united. She did as I said. For weeks, she imagined being embraced, loved, forgiven. She felt the ring on her hand, smelled the familiar scent of her beloved, and fell asleep in that state. Then one morning, a letter arrived. The person she loved had been dreaming of her for weeks. They reconciled, just as she had imagined it. The world will say it's chance, but I tell you, it is the law in action. The impossible only exists in the mind that forgets its creative power. When I desired a new home, I had no access to one. But I didn't allow that to stop me. I walked through rooms in my imagination, touched doorknobs, saw sunlight pouring through imagined windows. I breathed the air as if it were mine already. I acted as if the address had changed. And soon it did. Not by saving, not by pleading, but by aligning my inner world with the desired state. The external must follow the internal, just as the shadow follows the body. Let no one deceive you into thinking reality is fixed. There is no reality outside your own assumption. Whatever you consent to as true becomes your world. If you believe you are poor, unloved, or limited, then that becomes your lot. But the moment you withdraw belief from the facts and invest it into your imagined truth, you change the entire script. Imagination is not idle fancy, it is God in action. And what you imagine with feeling is more powerful than what you see with your eyes. What I manifested cannot be explained by logic, but it can be explained by law. And that law says, assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled and persist in it. Do not concern yourself with how. Live as if it were already done and watch the world rearrange itself. I manifested the impossible, not because I'm special, but because I used the divine gift we all have, the power to feel, believe, and live inwardly in the end. Try it. Prove it to yourself. For what you do in imagination today, you will walk through tomorrow. Imagination does not care about logic. It does not pause to verify circumstances, consult probabilities, or weigh the evidence of the senses. It simply creates. To the logical mind, this is madness. To the spiritual mind, it is the key to the kingdom. Imagination operates in a realm where what is real is not what appears, but what is assumed. An assumption, when persisted in, becomes fact. Logic builds its house upon the past. It tells you what is likely based on what has been. Imagination builds its mansion on what could be and claims it as already done. This difference is everything. There was a time when I too was enslaved by logic. I looked at my bank balance and made decisions based on what was real. I considered the opinions of others, measured outcomes, planned according to visible means. But nothing changed. The more I lived within the world of logic, the more I experienced repetition, limitation, and stagnation. Then came the shift. I realized that logic is only a servant, and a poor one at that, when left to lead. Imagination, when enthroned, becomes the master creator. I began to trust in what I saw within, regardless of what I saw without. And as I persisted, the inner became outer, the invisible became visible, and the impossible became my daily life. You cannot serve two masters. If you believe in reason and logic more than you believe in your own imagination, then you will always fall back into what the world calls reality. But reality is only the outpicturing of a previous state of consciousness. If you want to change the world around you, you must first change what you are imagining within. And when you begin this journey, you will notice something curious. The louder logic screams, the closer your manifestation often is, because logic resists what it cannot control. It tells you that healing takes time, that love is lost, that money requires years of toil. But imagination knows nothing of time, struggle, or distance. It knows only the now. To imagine is to assume. To assume is to feel, and to feel is to give life. All things are birthed first in feeling. If you imagine yourself in perfect health and feel it to be true, then health must come, for it already exists within. If you imagine yourself surrounded by abundance and persist in that feeling, then wealth must follow, for the cause is already planted. The world will try to make you doubt. It will hold up facts, numbers, reports, but none of it matters unless you give it your belief. Logic cannot stop imagination unless you surrender your power to it. You know, the greatest breakthroughs I have witnessed in my life and in the lives of others came at the point when logic had no answer. A woman I knew had been told she could never conceive. All the tests confirmed it, but she refused to bow to logic. She went into her room each night, placed a pillow beneath her shirt, and imagined feeling life move within her. She heard people congratulate her, imagined holding the child, smelling its skin, singing lullabies. And within months, the impossible happened. She was pregnant, not because she defied medicine, but because she believed in a higher law. Another man, out of work and ridiculed by family, imagined himself being called to interviews, shaking hands in celebrations, signing contracts. He didn't know how it would happen. He didn't need to. His imagination didn't care about the economy or his resume. It simply created what he dared to feel. And as he remained loyal to that inner vision, the outer world began to bend. Out of nowhere, an offer came. Then another. What was once deemed unlikely became his new normal. Because imagination does not operate by the rules of this world. You cannot reason your way into a miracle, but you can feel your way into one. That is the secret. Feel it now, not tomorrow, not later, not when the facts change. Feel now what you desire to be, and persist in that assumption. The world may not shift immediately, but the seed has been planted. And no power on earth can stop the harvest if you remain faithful to your inner state. Your imagination holds within it all possibilities, all timelines, all outcomes, and it will bring forth whatever you dare to claim as already yours. So ignore logic, not out of rebellion, but out of wisdom. For what you imagine, you become. What you feel, you create. What you assume, you experience. Imagination has no respect for what has been. It creates what shall be through you. The law does not care about probability. It does not measure likelihood, nor does it take into account what the world considers practical or realistic. This law functions beyond statistics, beyond history, beyond the collective opinion of men. It operates in the realm of consciousness, where only one thing matters, what you accept as true. If you assume a thing with feeling and remain loyal to that assumption, it will come to pass, not because it is probable, but because it is law. The universe is not governed by chance. It is governed by certainty, and that certainty lies in what you dare to claim as already yours. There was a time when I deeply wanted to experience a transformation that seemed utterly irrational by worldly standards. The people around me, though kind, were governed by fear and evidence. They said, be reasonable, look at the facts, be patient, maybe one day. But I had seen too much. I had experienced a strange and beautiful process by which a desire, when felt and lived in internally, outpictures itself in time. So I did not wait for the world's permission. I turned inward and began to assume, not once, not twice, but daily, until the feeling of already having it became more natural than the feeling of not having it. That was the turning point. The law does not respond to effort. It responds to alignment. When your inner state becomes one with the thing you desire, the law moves. It rearranges conditions, shuffles people, changes direction. You may think it impossible, but impossibility is merely a judgment from the logical mind. To the law, there is no such thing. Everything is a shadow cast by consciousness. So when consciousness changes, the shadow must also change. If you feel yourself into a new state, one where your desire is already fulfilled, the world must echo that state. It cannot do otherwise. Creation is a function of imagination, and imagination, once wedded to feeling, becomes destiny. I once met a man who had been overlooked, rejected, and forgotten. He wanted to rise to a position that, by all appearances, was reserved for others with better credentials. He was told it was impossible, but he refused to believe that the law could be limited by human standards. Each night he would sit quietly and feel himself in the role. He heard people greet him as the new leader. He felt the weight of responsibility, the confidence of knowing he had succeeded. He persisted, even when nothing in the outer world changed. And then, in a sudden turn of events, the person above him resigned, and he was called, not considered, not interviewed, but called to step into the role. That is the law. It does not ask, is it likely? It asks, what are you assuming? It is not arrogance to assume the best for yourself. It is obedience to the divine pattern within. If you deny yourself what you deeply desire because the odds are low, you are bowing to the false god of probability. But if you assume it with feeling, if you rest in the end as if it were already so, you activate the process that cannot fail. The timing may vary, the path may surprise you, but the result is certain. For the law does not work sometimes. It works every time. You must not look to the outer world to verify your assumptions. That is temptation. The outer world will often reflect the old state for a while, like an echo from a room you've just left. But you are not bound to what was. You are free to move in consciousness now, and when you do, the law begins to work. Invisibly at first, but always faithfully. To the degree that you accept your desired end as present fact, even when reason says otherwise, you will receive it. Many desire great change, but hesitate because it seems statistically rare. Yet it is only rare to those who have never claimed it within. For the one who lives inwardly, in thee and all things are common. Healing becomes ordinary. Wealth becomes natural. Love becomes expected. Because to such a one, the law is not a theory, it is a living truth. So do not ask, Can this happen? Ask only, am I willing to feel it real? For the law does not care about probability. It only reflects what you dare to believe. To persist in assumption is to possess the key to creation. The moment an individual adopts a state of consciousness and assumes it to be real, a process begins, invisible yet definite. And it is only through persistence in that assumption that the bridge of incidents is formed. The world, governed by appearances, is quick to offer distraction, contradiction, and delay. But these are merely tests, not from any external power, but from within, to see whether your assumption is firm or fleeting. The power lies not in the initial thought, but in the unwavering loyalty to that thought, held as fact, even when the outer world denies it. There was a time in my life when everything around me suggested lack. The bank account was empty, opportunities seemed scarce, and reason whispered that I should lower my expectations. But I knew that if I did, I would be assuming a lesser state, and that too would become my experience. So I turned inward and began to persist in a different reality. I imagined abundance, not in vague terms, but in detail. I saw the money in my hand, heard others congratulate me, and most importantly, I felt the relief, the confidence, the joy. I walked through the day as though what I imagined was already true. And though the world remained unchanged for a time, I persisted. Persistence is not repetition. It is not mechanical affirming or frantic effort. It is quiet, calm, consistent dwelling in the end, choosing moment by moment to identify with your desired reality. You do not need to strain, nor do you need to fight. You only need to remain loyal to the unseen image that lives in your imagination. To the senses, this seems like foolishness, but to the awakened soul, it is the only path to fulfillment. It is as if your only path to fulfillment. For what you persist in imagining, you will eventually experience. Consider this truth deeply. The world around you is always reflecting a former state of consciousness. What you see now is the echo of what you previously assumed to be true. If you dislike what you see, do not fight the reflection. Change the assumption. Persist in imagining what you wish were true and continue to feel its reality, even when nothing seems to move. For the movement is taking place within, and that movement, once stabilized, will be mirrored without. I knew a woman who longed for reconciliation with someone who had left her without a word. Days became weeks, and weeks became months, and every phone call unreturned was a temptation to abandon her assumption. But she did not. Every night she imagined him beside her. She heard his voice, felt his arms around her, lived in the conviction that they were united once more. When others told her to move on, she smiled silently, for she had already moved in consciousness. And one day, completely unannounced, he returned, not with apology, but with the exact words she had heard in her imagination. That is the reward of persistence. The mind, conditioned by time and logic, expects immediate results. It fears delay and doubts the unseen. But the law does not operate on panic. It waits only for your conviction to be settled. And when you cease wavering, when you choose to remain in the end, not out of desperation, but with quiet certainty, the world must yield. The state you persist in becomes the structure of your future. There is no limit to how many times you must return to the state. In the beginning, you may find yourself slipping. You may feel moments of doubt, fear, or discouragement. That is normal. But each time you return, you deepen the assumption. Each time you feel it real again, you are watering the seed. And one day, without fanfare, the outer world rearranges itself, and you walk into the very thing you once only imagined. Persistence does not mean resistance. It is not a struggle to force the world to change. It is a gentle, unwavering knowing that what you have assumed is already yours. You act from it, think from it, and feel from it, regardless of appearances. You do not chase, you do not beg, you simply remain. And that faithfulness to the end creates a new beginning. Everything you now call fact began in imagination. Every condition you experience was once an assumption you believed. If you would change your world, do not focus on the world. Focus on the assumption and persist. For to persist in assumption is to command the law. And when the law is commanded, the impossible becomes inevitable. The inner state is the cause, and the outer world is the effect. This is the law that governs all manifestation. You may look at your circumstances and believe they are fixed, immutable, dictated by external forces beyond your control. But this belief is itself an illusion, for nothing appears on the screen of your life that was not first imagined, accepted, or consented to within. To work on changing outer conditions while leaving the inner state untouched is to labor in vain. It is like attempting to change the reflection in a mirror without altering the face that casts it. All transformation begins in the unseen realm of consciousness. There was a time in my life when I desired a change so great that it seemed laughable to those around me. The outer facts opposed me. My environment contradicted the very possibility of my desire, but instead of arguing with appearances, I withdrew into the sanctuary of my imagination. I made the decision not to fight shadows, but to work on the light that cast them. I asked myself only one question: what would I feel like if this were already true? And once I found the feeling, I clung to it with quiet confidence. That was the turning point. The external world, which had once seemed so stubborn and immovable, began to shift in the most subtle and miraculous ways. You must understand, the outer world is not the master. It is the servant. It does not initiate change, it reflects it. When you dwell in a new inner state, persistently, confidently, lovingly, everything around you begins to conform. People, places, and events move to accommodate your assumption, not because you commanded them, but because you assumed your rightful place as creator. You need not ask how or when. The law works without your concern for mechanics. Your only responsibility is to inhabit the inner state with such conviction that it becomes more real to you than the evidence of your senses. I knew a man who for years lived under the shadow of debt and disappointment. He blamed the economy, his upbringing, and misfortune, but none of these were the cause. The true cause was his continual assumption of being trapped, unlucky, and undeserving. When he came to understand that his inner state was the source of his experience, everything changed. He stopped reacting to what was and began assuming what he wished to be. He imagined himself successful, independent, and at peace. He rehearsed this feeling daily, not just with words, but with emotion. He felt the joy of being free. And slowly, then suddenly, his outer world changed. New clients arrived, new ideas were born, and doors that had long been shut opened effortlessly. The inner state is not merely a collection of thoughts. It is a vibration, a dwelling place, a reality unto itself. To enter a new state, you must feel it deeply and accept it without doubt. You cannot visit the state for a moment and expect lasting change. You must live there. Speak from it. Think from it. Move through your day as if what you desire were already true. This is not pretense. This is faith, the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And when the inner state becomes your permanent residence, the outer world must take shape around it. Do not be fooled by temporary contradictions. Sometimes the world will appear to resist your assumption, but this is merely the echo of an old state losing its grip. It is not proof of failure, it is the dying gasp of a belief you once held. Persist in the new feeling. Refuse to be moved by appearances. Remind yourself that all that you see is a reflection, and it must change once the inner cause has been redefined. You are not subject to circumstances. Circumstances are subject to you. One woman, desperate for love, came to realize that all her relationships had mirrored a deep inner belief that she was not worthy. When she changed that belief, not by pleading with others, but by feeling herself loved, valued, and cherished within, her world transformed. She received the love she had longed for not because she chased it, but because she became it. The inner state is always the magnet. Whatever you are being inwardly is what you will attract outwardly. The greatest illusion is that something out there must change first. But nothing changes until you do, not in action, but in assumption. The moment you accept a new reality within, the law is set in motion. The details will take care of themselves. Focus only on your inner condition. Feel yourself already in possession of the thing you desire. Saturate your being with that feeling, and the world will respond, for it has no choice. It must mirror the inner man. The world does not change first. Your inner man must change first. This is the truth that escapes many, for they are so hypnotized by appearances that they believe the external world to be the cause of their experience. But the world is not causative. It is reflective. Everything you see, hear, and touch in the outer realm is simply a mirror reflecting your inner assumptions. The moment you shift your consciousness, not superficially, but deeply and emotionally, the mirror must reflect the change. The world may seem firm and unmoving, but it is nothing more than clay shaped by the hands of your inner state. If you would dare to assume a new identity and live in that assumption, the world would bend itself to fit your belief. I recall once when I deeply desired something that the world told me was out of reach. Every external indicator said no. There was no logical reason for it to happen, and yet I felt within that it was already mine. I closed my eyes each night and entered the state. I lived there in imagination. I felt it real. I heard voices congratulating me, saw the images of fulfillment, and most importantly, I felt the tone of victory within. I carried that feeling with me throughout the day, not as a hope, but as a knowing. Though the outer world had not changed, my inner man had. And because I remained loyal to that new man within, my world eventually reflected the change with mathematical precision. What had once seemed impossible became the only outcome. There is no outer change that does not begin as an inner shift. You cannot truly change anything in your life until you have first changed your own conception of self. If you see yourself as poor, every effort to acquire wealth will be met with invisible resistance, for your world is only ever bearing witness to who you are being within. If you feel unloved, every attempt at relationship will echo that lack. But when you shift your inner man, when you become the one who is already wealthy, already loved, already whole, you set in motion a chain of events that must express that identity. The law is impersonal. It does not judge. It does not ask whether you are worthy. It simply reflects what you are conscious of being. You must ask yourself, not what do I want, but who am I being? For all things follow the nature of your assumption. If you assume lack, you experience lack. If you assume fullness, you experience abundance. And this assumption must be felt, not as an idea, but as a reality. The inner man is not shaped by thought alone, but by the fusion of thought and feeling. You must feel yourself into the new state. Occupy it, move within it, and live as though it were the most natural thing in the world. That is the secret of transformation. There was a young man who desired to escape his limitations, but he kept trying to change the world around him. He switched jobs, moved cities, even changed his name, hoping that these outer movements would bring the inner peace he sought. But nothing worked, because he had not yet changed within. Then one day, he heard the truth, that the world was only a mirror, and he turned his attention inward. He began to imagine himself successful, confident, and at peace. He did this quietly, daily, without announcement. And then, without warning, everything shifted. A new job opened, one he did not seek. Relationships healed. Confidence replaced doubt. Because the inner man had changed, the outer had no choice but to conform. Do not wait for evidence before you believe. That is the way of the world, but it is not the way of the law. You must believe before it is seen. You must change the inner condition first, and when you do, the world becomes a servant to your new self. You may not know how the change will occur, and you do not need to. The law takes care of the how. Your task is only to live inwardly, in the state you desire to express. The moment you accept that state, the outer world begins to rearrange itself to match. Your world is your mirror. What you see is what you are. When you change your concept of self, the world must follow. For you are not here to conform to the world. You are here to transform it. By transforming yourself within, when the inner man changes, the outer must obey. There is no exception. This is law. Now you understand why I say I manifested the impossible, not once but many times, and not because I was lucky or chosen or special, but because I learned how to feel correctly, how to assume the end and live from it, how to ignore logic, how to persist in the face of contradiction, and how to change the inner man so the outer world would follow. All that you experience in your world is simply the echo of who you are within. Change your inner conversation and the world will speak back differently. Change the feeling in your heart and the world will offer new scenes, new people, new conditions to match that vibration. There is no effort greater, no investment wiser than to discipline the imagination, to enter each desire as though it were already fulfilled, and to dwell there without doubt. You do not need permission from the world to assume your ideal state. You do not need to wait for facts to prove your power. You only need to believe it before it is seen. The law responds not to outer action, but to inner conviction. When you feel something real enough times, the world will bow and become the servant of your assumption. It cannot resist the one who lives in the end. The impossible only exists to those who remain in the old man. But to the one who dares to claim the unseen as present reality, the world becomes clay. I have shared these truths, not from theory, but from experience. I have walked through doors that did not exist until I imagined them. I have held in my hands that which once existed only in feeling, and I have seen others do the same when they abandoned the world of facts and entered the world of faith. This is not fantasy. It is the structure of reality. Assume the end, feel it real, persist in that state, and you will prove, as I have, that nothing is truly impossible to the one who imagines boldly and faithfully. You are the operant power. You are the creator. Dare now to live from the end and let the world conform to you.